could, first of all, not everybody agrees with him, so maybe if you could introduce yourself and a little bit about where you come from and how you got into the activism business.
It was by accident. I'm Layla Caraway. In 2007, my house, during a flood in Halton City, my house almost fell into Big Fossil Creek. So if you turned on a TV or bought a newspaper, you saw me. I couldn't go to the grocery store without people going, "You're the girl from the TV." So I was hoping my 15 minutes were over, and then John calls and says, "Let's do this meeting to teach people what's happening or still happening." And I'm like, "We had this meeting in 2011. This is a reunion." The flooding, the whole situation, that was my crash course in media and politics. And I learned a lot during all that. And the more I learned, the better I got. The Corps has been studying, that's one of their favorite words. They've been studying the Big Fossil watershed for decades. The Big Fossil watershed has been flooding for decades. I learned there's no money to fix these problems on these tributaries, but our congresswoman can give her son $1 million of our money to reroute the river, build an economic development scheme, buy eminent domain. And so I figured the only way to fix anything, I got pissed, and the only way to fix anything was to change it. So I learned what a water board was. Hi guys. You're fine. You're fine.
And sorry about the bad directions, everybody.
I learned what a water board was, and in 2010 we ran our first water board race. Adrian Murray was one of our campaigners who did a great job. We learned a ton. We learned when you run a water board race, you're not running against the water board candidates. You're running against the mayor. You're running against the media. You're running against the congresswoman. You're running against council, commissioners, lobbyists, contractors. You're running against the whole world. So anybody else in here that's done it?
7th Street Gang.
The 7th Street Gang. Anybody, Clyde, Mary, Adrian, there's a handful of people that have done it and done it again. And I would applaud anybody that stands up to this whole group and does this. It is a meeting. But the people who are doing it for the right reasons, you've got to support these people. You just have to. So that was in 2010. In 2011 and 2012, there was a group of us that started a 501c3. It was called TRIP, the Trinity River Improvement Partnership. And our tagline was "Save a River, Save a Billion." And, I went to a screenwriting class. I made a documentary film with one of the gentlemen who had his property taken by eminent domain for the Trinity River Vision. He had a photography studio in Fort Worth for over 20 years. And he spent almost that long fighting to try to keep it or to be paid fairly for it. So he was instrumental in helping us fight this fight and make this movie. And we're going to show you some clips today, but if you want to see the whole movie, you can Google Layla Caraway Up a Creek, and you can watch the whole movie there. So again, we've been doing this for a long time. I see a lot of familiar faces out here that have been helping us, and that's been the best part of this whole ordeal is the people I've met, the friends I've made. I'm lucky Mary still talks to me since I talked her into this the first time. So we're on my 5.5 water board race. And I say a half because if you'll remember, they canceled an election. There's another person that was running.
I'll just tell you, Chicago and New Orleans elections, they ain't got nothing to do. I mean, those are clean races.
So while we've had few election wins, this devoted group, some of them here today, some of them not, has taken this small, inexpensive, unheard of race and put it on the front page of the paper. They're spending money on it now. There's a larger voter turnout. People know what a water board is. And talking about the larger voter turnout, I mean, one year they had like 10,000 mail-in votes, something like that. Can you believe that? No. Neither can I. But voter fraud is another portion of this section. So running for this, again, is not for the faint of heart, and I applaud these guys that have done it. I also thank Channel 5, because recently they're the only media team that has been out there showing you the reasons. We tried to show you back in 2011. Mary tried to tell you back in 2013. As for the house in Haltom City, that was a 2-year ordeal. It ended up getting fixed not by the Corps or the Water District or even by the city, because it would have affected their infrastructure. And so we, as the neighborhood, went into an agreement with the city to fix that. There's an 1,100-foot long, 33 feet high wall back there that saved 12 houses from falling into the creek and taking all their infrastructure with it. So we did get that wrapped up. Talking of candidates, here's another water board candidate we should applaud, and for the few people I don't know in the room, any TRWD moles, let me make it clear. I know Haltom City is not in the water district. The issue with that is, one, Haltom City was not created, that it didn't exist when they made the water district, but two, they are still in charge of my future water supply. They're in charge of my current water bill. The Trinity River vision affects my Tarrant County taxes. They're in charge of upstream and downstream from me. If you look at the map, they're responsible for this and this. So while I understand Haltom City is not in the water district, we are caught right in the middle. And the Corps, is so misdirected. Imagine how many flooding issues we could correct if we had consistent funding and no higher priorities. Those were the two of the things listed in the letter from the Corps to Congresswoman Granger when I pressed, while my house was falling off on national TV, when I pressed for answers of why these studies weren't done and nothing had been happening. And inconsistent funding and higher priority work were the two reasons. So if you can imagine how many flooding situations we could fix if we were looking at the right issues. There's also a COG document. The COG is the North Central Texas Council of Governments. That states the Trinity floodplain is 240 square miles. They talk about the potential for massive floods within the Trinity floodplain that would cause billions of dollars worth of damages and untold loss of life. So my question in all of this has always been, who is protecting us? Because it's damn sure not them.
Sure. Now we're going to take a look at, and it's interesting how the thing that got me interested, and everybody's got their own story on, you're upset about the fact that this is a fiscally irresponsible project. You may not like what's going to happen to the environment. You may not like the fact that they're not mitigating flooding, they're just rearranging flooding. They're pushing flooding downstream. But for me, it was the eminent domain abuse that got me going. And it's kind of, it is kind of funny, but the first map I saw where they were going to eminent domain included Angela's barbecue. And I was like, you take that barbecue right from my cold, dead hands. We're going to stop this thing. Interestingly enough, they redrew it, and it actually now did not include Angela's barbecue, but I was still pretty pissed off. And Bob Blueprint and some other good people had their land just stolen from them. So that's the thing that got me going. So I guess now what we'll do is we'll kind of watch a couple of clips of Layla's documentary. It's a lot of familiar faces talking about the problems about this. So if you wouldn't mind hitting the first one.
In 2003, the draft plan for the Trinity Uptown project was put together, and in 2004, it was presented to the council.
The question comes up is who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be the taxpayers, or is it going to be the developers who benefit from it? And that kind of gets to the heart of the question. Not only who's going to pay for it, but how.
The Trinity River Vision is an extraordinary project, but it is something that should not be funded by the taxpayer. The economic development such as this should be done in the private sector.
We use the word earmarks, and that's kind of a dirty word. That's how it was put into that project. It was tacked onto a bill. It didn't get vetting through committees. And so what you had is a congressman, as a point of personal privilege, stuck this thing into a bill that wasn't necessarily debated by Congress. But the initial bill only permitted a project not to exceed $220 million, with the federal component not more than $110 million. That has not changed. And so even though the money hasn't been, even the $110 million hasn't been appropriated, we're now looking at a project that's approaching $1 billion, probably will grow to more than that over time. And so what you have is a project that was authorized at not to exceed $220 million, that's now 5 times that, and the federal component that was authorized has never been appropriated other than small amounts that were snuck in for bridges and studies and a few things like that. In this Trinity River Vision project, the developers want the citizens to pay for the cost of development, so all they have to do is put their buildings up and make some money.
I think one of the problems is that you can't take a semi-arid city like Fort Worth and remake it in the image of Vancouver, British Columbia. You just can't afford this high cost of downtown development at the expense of all our suburbs. We're a 300 and some square mile city. That city has a lot of roads that need to be fixed, has a lot of drainage problems. We have billions in unfunded liabilities when it comes to infrastructure. And we need to take care of those and quit pandering to special interests that want to use public money to make money.
All right, hey, thanks a lot. So, yeah, and I heard it, Clyde said it earlier that, they were trying to kind of paint this as we're going to be the next Vancouver, the waterway city. San Antonio, you know what? I spent a lot of time in business in San Antonio. The Riverwalk's kind of cool, I gotta admit, but the crazy thing about the Riverwalk is that the river actually ran through, naturally through San Antonio, and they actually built a Riverwalk around it. So it's just an insane idea. They didn't make a river so anyhow, I'd like to introduce Clyde Peach, former city councilman for Fort Worth, and he's been fighting this since day one.
I was a little bit shocked to see myself wearing the same shirt. I
noticed that. I thought you were worthless. That's funny.
I was on the city council 1997 to 2005. This project was brought to us in 2003, December 2003, I believe it was. And I did vote for it, I have to admit, because it was a $360 million project. They had an economic analysis that said it would bring in, would increase the tax base by $1 billion. And there were a lot of attractive components to it. I don't know when it started, to tell you the truth, because Gideon Toll, local planning and development company, was working on it. They had already consulted with Bingcom, an Oregon noted developer, urban developer, and they had already, what I think is contrived a way to set it up to where nobody is going to be in charge. And that is by having a water Trinity River Vision Authority created that is controlled by a board with representatives from the city, the county, the water district, and I can't remember who else. So, we had this set up, and I'm a little bit concerned about that because this is a Fort Worth project, there's no question about it. It's not a county project, it's not a water district project, it's a Fort Worth project. It's a Fort Worth development project, not a flood control project. And it irritates me a great deal when I keep hearing that it's a flood control project. But it is a development project, and it was promising when I first saw the plan, and so I voted for it. But I had a minor reservation at the time about the low amount of money for abating the contaminated areas on what is now they're calling Panther Island. This was originally called the Central City Project, by the way. And it was $22 million. It just looked right to me at the time, but the city had done an environmental survey, drilling holes every 50 feet and so far down, and they said, no, it's not all that bad. Should be able to take care of it. Well, that's obviously false because it has been much more than that. But the next thing that kind of bothered me was the TIF. And when the TIF came up, I had more reservations and I voted against the TIF. In fact, I was the only one on the council that did. But the TIF, is anybody sound familiar with the TIF?
Could you explain what the TIF is?
A TIF is a tax increment financing district. And when the TIF is established, the values are established for all the properties within that TIF boundary. And let's say your property value is $100,000, and you pay taxes to the city on that $100,000. And then the increment above that $100,000 is diverted from the public revenues to the TIF district, and is spent within the TIF district. Now the TIF 9, which is the Trinity River Vision TIF, is a 80-20 split. So there's 80% of the increase over that base value goes to the TIF, and 20% comes back to the city. Now, a lot of that property over there in that area had very low value to begin with. A lot of it industrial, a lot of it unoccupied, it's vacant land, so the value would be very low. But when the property is developed to them, a great deal of that money, 80% of the increase, will go into the TIF district, and 20% will come to the city. So it's actually taking what should, yes ma'am?
How long is the TIF?
Well, the TIF was originally 25 years, as I recall. I can't remember exactly what the first was, but they've expanded it since. And they've expanded the TIF district itself twice. So what we have is a growing area that the tax revenues that would normally go into the city's coffers to pay for things like the drainage and the street repairs and that sort of thing, infrastructure, that is not going to go to the city now. It's going to stay within that TIF district, and much of that will be paid to the water district for money they spend on some of the excavations and the flood work that they're doing on the other side. I had something I did want to read to you because it really is quite telling. This is from the project and financing plan on the TIF 9, Trinity River Vision. It says it was created to promote redevelopment along the Trinity River. So, created to promote development along the Trinity River, while creating mixed-use development and utilizing Gateway Park as hydraulic valley storage to provide the necessary flood protection associated with the bypass flood control project. Well, the bypass channel, after we approved this thing, we went back to Oregon and built a replica of the Trinity River, about a 100-yard replica. Cost the city $1 million. And they did a hydraulic study to see how much water would flow and what have you. And as a result of that study, they widened the channel somewhat. Because if you realize that you take the curves out of the river and increases the speed and volume of water that goes down to the channel. And so by 2005, I think they had done that, and that required them that they redesign the bridges. And at the time, in 2005, the city was committed to a $26.6 million bond for bridges. And they casually mentioned the TIF, but not anywhere. It wasn't as large then as it is now, and we didn't expect to pay so much money. In fact, James Toll, with Gideon Toll, he's deceased now, but at the time he said if Peter here, Jim Oliver, Water District Director, I can't remember which one, but one of them said that if we need more money, then we'll get it locally, we'll get it somewhere, but the poor rich taxpayers won't be left holding the bag. Those were his words. Well, poor rich taxpayers are being left holding the whole bag. And by 2005, I was convinced this was a ill-conceived project because Jim Oliver, Water District Director, hired J.D. Granger. J.D. Granger was a graduate of a fourth-tier law school down in San Antonio and had no experience in building development or anything coming close to it. And I wrote about that, I think, and Rich Connor in the Business Press wrote about that. It raised some alarms because here's somebody that's coming to take over even at that point, $435 million project, and he has no building development engineering experience whatsoever. And that's not a good sign. So anyway, I was opposed to it then. In 2006, I decided to run for the Water District Board of Directors. I lost by a bunch of write-in ballots that were illegal in my estimation. I'm pretty sure they were. But that notwithstanding, I've been against it ever since. Now, I'm 85 years old. I'm not going to lose anything or gain anything from this project. And I see some of you here probably won't either. And in fact, Betsy Price said that they would extend the TIF out to 40 years if necessary. And so that's when the city starts getting some money back 40 years from now. It took the city of Fort Worth 150 years just to fill up downtown. I don't expect them to fill that area in 40 years. And what I do expect from the city, and this is something to keep in mind too, is that this city has a penchant for giving abatements, tax incentives. One reason they left out Pier 1 out of the TIF, the Pier 1 building, was because it was a 380 tax deal that goes for, I don't know, probably 60 years. And we have spent an awful lot of money in this project already, and we're going to spend a whole lot more. And I guarantee you it's going to go well over what they estimate now is $1.1 billion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'll leave questions for later.
All right, well, hey, thank you very much. Yes, like you said, it started $300 and change million at first, and I said this early on that way back then, when we just got the price tag, I said, if you don't think this is going to be $1 billion project, then you have woefully overestimated the competency of any government project ever. That said, there has been, here's a little point of reference. If you want to drive from Florida to Key West, the furthest point in the United States, it's 113 miles, I think, of bridges over the ocean, all right? The biggest bridge is a 7-mile bridge. It's 7 miles all by itself. It's 65 feet in the air. They completed that bridge in 1/3 of the time that it took us to get these big, giant, ugly V's in the middle of dirt, by the way. Yeah, so there's no ocean, and they still can't get it done. So anyhow, we're going to show a couple more clips, and then we'll bring up Mary to talk in just a second.
The problem is, a few years back, when all this Trinity River Uptown started, one of our state legislators, Charlie Guerin, snuck a bill through the legislature. Most of the state reps that I've talked to said they didn't realize what it meant, what was going to happen. It empowered the water district to engage in economic development, to borrow money, to lend money, and to take property away from citizens for economic development purposes, not for flood control or general purposes. And so the water board then, with its expanded powers, because of Representative Guerin, then went much further and eventually started this whole project that they've got. Way beyond what their initial mandate was when it was created.
Why does the Tarrant Regional Water District need a Washington lobby?
Am I?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's what I call pseudo flood control. That's just a false idea. I was here in 1949 when we had a flood. And after that flood, Congressman Jim Wright, primarily responsible, got the great levees that we have to preserve and protect us from any such future disaster. And I have seen myself in the records at the Corps of Engineers that anything needed in the way of flood control could be done for about $10 million.
Five.
Are we good? Okay. Great. And hey, the echo's kind of gone and the levels are better. Okay. I literally texted my son-in-law and said, "Oh, get rid of the echo on this thing." It'll work. No. So one thing I hope that you notice is that the spectrum of people who are against this, there are some people like Lon Burnham. That's no secret. He's a progressive Democrat. We have Don, who is a stalwart of the Democrats. We've got, people that are on, I'll just say much more right-leaning. We have some good Republicans like, Adrian Clyde is certainly on the right side of the spectrum. And then you got me. I'm a true North libertarian. I say this all the time, wherever you reside on the political spectrum, there is something for you to hate about this project. So, and speaking of somebody who is just almost politically, you can't kind of peg where she is. She's great. She's an independent voice. And it's our one-time conscience and future conscience, I believe, of the Tarrant Regional Water District, and that's Mary Kelleher. So Mary, so we'll have a chair between us here. I'm kind of running out of cord. So, all right. So Mary, it's like Layla said that. I don't know why you talked to her after she talked you into running for, and the water board, as a interrogation method has been also, ruled illegal by the Geneva Convention, and it is torturous. Running for it is torturous. So maybe you can tell us what prompted your interest in running for the water district in the first place.
I'm not proud to admit I was one of those people that I didn't know who my congressperson was. I didn't even know who the mayor was until 2010. 2010 just totally changed my life. My husband and I run about 100 head of cattle on the east side of Fort Worth in Trinity Bottoms. And it's flooded since the beginning of time, so it was expected. And the water would come in slowly and recede quickly, and it was very manageable. But in 2010, the water came in, and within 15 minutes, my backyard was the Trinity River. I was waist high in it. My husband and I were swimming in it. Fire ants clinging to our bodies, stuff rubbing up against us underwater. We lost cattle. We lost a llama. I had to swim in that water and decide which sheep I could maybe pull out and save. I still have nightmares seeing the eyes of some of those sheep that I wasn't able to save. It was a horrible experience. So then I started calling different agencies, my city, my Congress people, everyone and anyone that I could get a hold of. And I found no one cared about the little guy. And it just made me so angry. This was in September of 2010, so for 180 days until the water started to evaporate, I had dead animals floating in my yard. I couldn't get anybody to help me, and I mean nobody. I was going to city councils, telling my story, and I started getting these emails from Up Creek, and I thought, who's this lady? She's sending me all kinds of interesting information, and I found out later it was Layla. So I met her, and on the last day of filing in 2013, she asked me if I was interested in running, and I didn't even consult my husband. I just went ahead and I said yes, because someone has to be in there to be able to speak for the people. So I ran, and thank you, Jesus, I got in somehow. So that was discouraging too. They actually even hired a special attorney at the taxpayer's expense to try to keep me from getting records for the water district, and actually tried to keep me out of executive session. So in that time, they asked me to leave executive session, but I planted my butt right in the chair and I refused to leave. So they just didn't do executive session at that time. This was an interesting one too. I would watch as some of the board members would come into the building, and they had like a Chubb card, and they'd go in different offices in the back. So I asked the general manager if I could have a key, and he laughed and said, oh no. So if I had to go to the restroom during breaks and board meetings and it was busy, staff had to escort me through that building to another restroom. So all this, I just thought, what are these people hiding that I can't even have access to this building? Then, probably the most famous one is that I was censured. I was censured because I advocated for the city, for Fort Worth citizens who, in order for them to be able to water their lawns at their own discretion, and so that the board censured me actually, but a group of people, some of the ones in here, later presented me with a badge that said duty, honor, courage, censured. So I'm still very proud of that.
Okay, well, yeah, so they locked you out of the bathroom. I mean, that's pretty bad. So despite your mistreatment by the board, can you tell me some of the things that you were able to accomplish while on the board?
Yes, I'm really proud of a lot of the things I got done, considering that I wasn't very well liked there, but I kind of had to shame them into it. One of the first things was I asked for the meetings to be live streamed, because they're in the morning during the week when most people have to work. So they started doing that, they agreed to do it. So all meetings are now live streamed and saved in an archive for people to look at it at their convenience. Weekly water testing of the recreational areas. When my property flooded, and it did 3 times, really, really bad, like the first one, came down, my husband and I both came down with the worst E. coli ever. And I see these people tubing in the Trinity, kayaking, and I'm thinking, oh my God. So what is there to at least tell the people let them make an educated decision about what they're putting themselves into. So I had weekly testing that was approved by the board unanimously, and now they do that weekly, and that's posted on the website so people can make an educated decision. It's a couple days off, but I mean, it's good, it's valuable information. Ironically, after I got on the board, in 2015, that was the last big flood that we had on our property, and the other people downstream of me as well. During one of the board meetings, I asked the engineer, why do you release water from the lakes. And he just very nonchalantly said it's to protect the property owners around the lake. So I asked him, what about the people downstream? And without even hesitating, he said they're not considered. And I was devastated because that's all of us downstream, and it's supposed to be flood control. And wow, but since they brought that out, I haven't been able to keep the water levels in the Trinity just right to the very top. So we haven't flooded since 2015, so which shows me that they can do a much better job of controlling the levels of the river. I asked for increased seismology equipment at the TRWD dam. That was during a time when we were having a lot of earthquakes, and just imagine what would have happened if there was an earthquake at our dams. One of my favorite things that I managed to get done was the ethics policy. I had asked for the ethics policy for the water district, and I was told there wasn't one. Just that there was just one for the board. So about a week later, I guess, in my mail, I found somebody had mailed me a copy of the ethics policy for the water district. So I read it over, and it was pretty good until you came to the last page, and there was an exception clause that said exceptions can be made to this policy at any time by the general manager and the assistant general manager. So I'm thinking, why have an ethics policy if you can make exceptions? And like we briefly touched on the nepotism part, Jim Oliver has so many relatives working there. We actually did a little family tree of all the relatives. So it's really interesting. But Channel 5, I think, has that, and that might be something coming up in the near future. One of my biggest accomplishments, I think, is the aquifer storage recovery. And I'm going to talk on that a little bit later because it's a little technical. But it's very interesting. So I think I did manage to, considering that it was usually 4-1, I did get some good things passed.
Because you're, I agree. You are during the time she was on the board, we were wanting to kind of get the name going, Sunshine Mary, because sunshine is the best disinfectant. Whenever you've got an infection, and there was an infection, and she was the sun shining right on all of it.
May I ask who were the other 4 board members when you were on that?
Yes, it was Jack Stevens.
Yes, for asking a question. And her email was to somebody who asked, I've seen a lot of signs along the river that says you can't eat the fish. I think this really puts a bad image out there for us. And why do we have that? We should take those down, and there's no reason that, this is going to scare people away from fishing. I was like, this is literally the dumbest person I've ever, this is an actual official email that was like, wow. So, box of rocks. Okay. So, anyhow, didn't mean to get too far off track there. So, we're talking about Panther Island here. So, what do you think that taxpayers and anybody around here should know about Panther Island, how we're paying for it?
I think it's very misleading, and I think I'm just going to talk about the bonds. The most recent bond, the 2018 one, that people voted for, and we were tricked. When you read it, it said for flood control and drainage improvements. Now, who in their right mind is not going to vote for that? Panther Island wasn't mentioned one bit in that whole proposition. So that was $250 million. I did a little bit of digging, and what I found out was we were due 2 other times. In 2004, the people voted for Proposition 1, and that was for $232 million. And that was supposed to be for sewer improvements, and turned out it was actually for the design and construction of the Panther Island Project. So little did y'all know. Then they did it to us again in 2008, and that one was for $150 million. That said for street improvements, but if you read the fine print, it was actually for the construction, the design of the 3 V bridges. So I haven't had a chance to really dig back in, but there's no telling what other things we voted for, thinking that it was in our best interest when they tricked us by not being transparent in the information.
You know, it's bait and switch every time, and you'll hear on the documentaries here, the word Trinity Uptown, Trinity River Vision, and now Panther Island, and I think that's part of that old switcheroo, that you kind of get a bad taste in your mouth about this uptown thing, but Panther Island, that's a new thing, and it's all the same $1 billion.
The other thing that I want to make sure that the people that we know, the people find out, and we have to spread the word because so many people don't even know what the water district does. So it's important that people like us in here share that information and educate others. There's unintended consequences to the Panther Island Project too, which isn't factored into any of the costs. And that's the fact that that area is an old industrial area. And God only knows what all is under there. While I was on the board, we had one piece of property that they wanted to remediate, and I think it was just 1.5 acres of property, and it turned out to be almost $4 million to clean it up. So if you think of all the acreage on Panther Island, there's no telling how expensive it would be to remediate that area. I mean, as far as they're a partner in the project. You don't. No, that would be. I think it would be TCEQ and EPA, and I think EPA is involved because there's these things, nasty things called superfunds, and there's a few of them located on the Panther Island property.
Can we wait for questions?
The Corps of Engineers.
Come on.
Any big water project like Panther Island is required to have a cost-benefit analysis done. And one wasn't done in this case. So in 2017, the Corps came in and gave us a little update on the safety of the levees, which are safe, by the way, which we haven't flooded since 1949. So I asked why a cost-benefit analysis hadn't been done, and I was told it was waived. Well, they called J.D. Granger up to the podium to address the question. So I asked J.D., how was a waiver obtained to not have to do a cost-benefit analysis? Well, he explained that at the time, they really didn't have to do one, but it was waived anyway. And I said, by whom? And he said, Congress. And I said, specifically by whom? And he said, Congress.
My mommy.
Yeah. So the third time, I said, isn't it true that it was Congresswoman Kay Granger that was managed to get a waiver for the cost-benefit analysis? And he said, yes, it's my mother, and I'm proud of her. So
You should watch the video, that clip. Right.
Okay, so just wrapping this up, and by the way, maybe hold your questions till the end. We'll have all panelists up here to discuss this. But so once you get elected, what's on your agenda and what are you planning on getting done?
yeah, first thing is, I think, obviously, fiscal responsibility. We need to have that audit done, that financial audit done. It needs to be done by an honest company, too, not one that's in red. Yeah, not exactly. So that's, of course, that's one of my focuses. Returning TRWD's original mission was actually flood control and water supply. And if you look at the water district lately, they've really deviated from their mission statement. And so it's my hope that I can kind of get them back on track where we're looking at the primary flood control and water supplies. I also wanted to, I'm going to discuss aquifer storage recovery, which is, I've kind of turned into a water nerd since I've been on the board doing all kinds of research. And it was Dave Marshall is a very brilliant engineer who's on the staff at TRWD. And one of his dreams was aquifer storage recovery. I didn't know what it was. And what it is let's just think of all the aquifers that are underground, and everybody has their straw in an aquifer, and we're all sucking it out. But the water isn't being put back in. Aquifer storage recovery could be placed a lot less cheaply. Sorry for my grammar. Than some other methods, but basically, it's a well that's drilled nearby facilities that treat water. That water is injected underground where it doesn't evaporate, and it can just sit there until we need it. So I think a lot of people don't know that most of our water originates, that we drink, originates here, but that gets sent downstream to Richland Chambers and Cedar Creek, where it's stored in those reservoirs until we need it. And then we pump it uphill 100 miles here, when we could be storing it underground. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense to be pumping it like that.
Like $2 million to pump.
No, the major cost at the water district with water is the electricity to get it upstream. Now there's Village Creek Water Treatment Facility treats 1.5 million gallons a day, and that's put in the Trinity River just to go downstream. That I'm proud to announce that one is coming to Fort Worth. We're going to add to the cities that are already using that, and one's going to be put in by the Trinity River Authority on Trinity Boulevard, and it's going to be a very, very deep one, but it'll be able to hold millions and millions and millions of gallons of water that we'll be able to pull out in the event of an emergency. So I hope that after this pilot program, we can probably get some more around our area. And last but not least, I want to be your voice again. Some people say I'm a glutton. Adrian said you're a glutton for punishment, but I really have passion for flooding and for water, either too little or too much. So we need someone on that board that's going to ask questions. So that's what I'm hoping to get back on.
Good deal. So imagine now we've got a person who actually thinks that the water district should be in charge of flood control, actual flood control, and providing raw water to our municipalities, instead of building an island that didn't exist and having country music concerts where people are floating around in a big pile of pieces. I think that's a plan that could work myself. So anyhow, thank you very much, Mary. Let's see if that does. I'll give it about 10 seconds and maybe 15 seconds, and if we continue to spin, I'll tell you what. We say we'll just pause it, and I'll bring up the next speaker. So, we've talked about kind of where this started, where it has been, and one of the things that we've alluded to quite a bit is the fact that the politics around this are as dirty and rotten as I've ever seen. More money is spent on this than on a lot of U.S. congressional races. And there's a reason why. There's a billion reasons why people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get on the TRWD board. But I'd like to invite up a guy who knows a few things about politics, and it's our former Representative Lon Burnham. So if you could welcome him.
So, good afternoon, folks. Apologies for getting here late. I was committed to be in Dallas until 2 o'clock, and I'm even later than I expected to be. And so I haven't had the advantage of hearing what has already been said by some of the other speakers, so I apologize if I repeat anything. I guess I should start with thanking the Libertarians for organizing this occasion. I bring greetings from Mark Miller, who was your candidate for Railroad Commission 2 years ago and pulled in more votes statewide than I think any other Libertarian candidate ever. Mark and I worked on a lot of sunshine legislation in the last couple of legislative sessions. But as for today, the Trinity vision is focused in Central Fort Worth, right? I was the state representative for Central Fort Worth. I was elected in 96, served from 97 until 4 years ago. In theory, protocol-wise, a special district that's created by the state, whether it's a water district or a school district or county creates your hospital districts, these are all, in a way, from the standpoint of the Constitution, subdivisions of state government. And courtesy would suggest that anything that they were going to do to add to its activities, they'd go through the local state representative, which would have been me, but of course they did not. Now, that's not to say that I'm blaming them for sidestepping and going to somebody else. I'm just saying the normal courtesies are frequently not extended to elected officials like Clyde and Mary and myself. That's kind of standard operating procedure. Some people call it the Fort Worth Way. Some people are beginning to acknowledge the Fort Worth Way. It's kind of designed to keep people that have a different opinion about things from being a part of that process. So, you know, I had some concerns, but let me back up and make sure I make one point. I was not inherently against this in the first place. My graduate degree is in city and regional planning, and I believe that there's a role for the public sector to encourage economic development projects. The public sector has done that all these many years when they were paying for canals to go east of the colonial period, when they were subsidizing train development. That's all about transportation. It's not inherently wrong, but very often, as anybody can know by just observing your media outlets, very often these projects are designed to benefit disproportionately the already rich and subsidized by the working folks. In this case, I think that's exactly what you all have seen is happening, and I think Mary has made some points in the past, I don't know if you did today. Look, they've really morphed the role of the water district from water supply and flood control management to economic development, and apparently they just weren't adequately prepared for the growth of their job because they've done such a terrible job of doing it. So you've got the project in process. I want to be clear that as appalled as I am about the management of the project itself, we got a couple of things going here. One, about 200 small businesses were run out of business or at least made to transfer their location inherently because of the way the laws in Texas operate. Usually, the people that are being subjected to eminent domain are at a distinct disadvantage, and they're usually cheated. And I think that's true of many of the small businesses that were affected by this process. Now, I had this kind of ambivalent feeling about the project because I've known about the brownfields in the area for all these many years, and I know that just the nature of the beast, nothing was going to be done to address this concern. And in theory, although I have not done due diligence to see whether or not it's working or not, some of those concerns are being addressed. Many people think they may not be adequately being addressed, and they're talking about turning a lot more dirt and exposing a lot more toxics than they should at any rate. So my relationship here is one, the typical Fort Worth way. While I was the duly elected representative of the area, I was excluded by the establishment from the process. Two, as an environmentalist, I'm concerned about how this may be developed, what's going on. And three, just as a person that favors openness, sunshine, and access to government, I think the people that were most directly affected were not treated fairly. And then you come along and, you know, you've got Clyde and a lot of other good people with goodwill trying to run for the office, but because voter participation is so low in most local elections, they get away with a lot in local elections because people are just not paying attention and they're not participating. So my role with the water district is the first time I tried to vote in a water board election was back in the 70s when a good friend of mine who was active with the League of Women Voters and her husband helped found the Sierra Club here in Fort Worth was running, and they had like 500 or 600 people actually vote in that January or February election. It was a long time ago. We've made some progress. You have the election now on the unified local local election day in May. You don't have filing deadline the day after Christmas anymore. You don't open up until the middle of January. And obviously, the number of people voting has increased. But frankly, there's a direct relationship to the number of people that are bothering to vote to how much money is being spent. And the special interest in Fort Worth are always going to outspend the general interest. And so we're always going to be at a disadvantage in the electoral process. It's just one of the things you have to get used to. So one of the things I've done this year is working with a lot of people that were involved in the 2018 elections. We started this May 4th coalition. The May 4th coalition exists specifically to encourage increased voter participation, empowerment, and turnout in local elections. And so my mantra that I always go back to, and Layla will just chop my hand off if I don't mention how it's contextual to this, voter turnout is critical. It is even that more critical in these low turnout elections because it's that much easier to still the outcome of an election when you have low voter turnout. Some of you may not know that my loss in the Democratic primary in 2014, we contested in the courts. There have been a number of other elections that if you look at the vote by mail vote harvesting process closely, you will realize that there's something rotten in Denmark or something to that effect. The most effective way the general public can fight that is to be committed to turning out people to vote, just your plain up grassroots, because any good government person that's running for the water board, if they're not being subsidized by the Moncrief interest, they are being subjected to an unbalanced playing field because they have to overcome the early vote turnout. And so, in a very recent local election that I liked the outcome of the election, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest it was manipulated by the early vote, City Fort Worth charter election where almost nobody bothers to vote. We've now decided to have increased the number of seats on the city council. I like that outcome, but if you look at the vote by mail results of that, you can tell that that election was again taken through harvested votes. Most of these outcomes I don't like most of the water board elections in my own primary, a city council race on the north side, which was stolen with a margin of 23 votes. And let me tell you, the harvesting program. So for you, the general public, I hope you will just work and realize that, what was that cliche line about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers? She had it twice as hard as he did because she had to do it backwards in high heels. The good government activists are kind of like Ginger. They have to do it twice as good at it because they had to do it backwards and in high heels. For those of us that are a little more connected to the process, I think we won a school board race last time around, a local election, because we were so diligent in talking to the Attorney General's office about their investigations of illegal vote harvesting, and they were in our community investigating, and there was not nearly as much vote harvesting in that last school board election as was this time. So strategically speaking, none of you should be surprised to know that I met with that Assistant Attorney General again this week and said, you know, it'd be really nice if we could get some more investigations going here in Fort Worth for this local election cycle. And I make a huge distinction between encouraging people to vote by mail, which I've always did as an elected official, and I would always try to facilitate that. But there's quite simply a huge difference in sending out mail, encouraging people, particularly people who are 65 or older and eligible to vote by mail, calling these people, and this has happened in this community, taking the ballots out of the mailbox and not ever letting the person that it's intended for see it, and marking the ballots for them, and this happens a lot, throwing ballots away because the harvester does not like the way the ballots are marked. All of this, it's like so many other things. It's got to be enforced by interested citizens because there's not enough assistant attorney general staff to be in the field to make sure this next upcoming local election isn't determined by harvested ballots. We've got to work in the field to get people to turn out to vote and stop the theft of elections. And I mean, that's the short version as far as I'm concerned, but I believe you're going to take questions next from the group.
Yeah, we'll get the group up after another couple of clips, but I wonder if we could have Christine Wellborn actually.
Christine doesn't know anything about vote harvesting. Why are you asking her up here?
Would you mind coming up and maybe tell a little bit about your experience?
Okay, so I wasn't expecting to speak, so I don't have anything prepared, but I will say that I'm Christine Wellborn. I'm the Director of Election Integrity with Direct Action Texas, and we have done a lot of work, a lot of research into exposing mail-in ballot fraud and election fraud in general. And I want to tell you, mail-in ballot fraud is real. I've seen it. I've spoken to individuals who've had their votes taken. I've spoken to an individual who had a woman convince him to sign her paperwork so that she could go home for the day because she came to his door, and it turned out she was actually asking him to sign his ballot, and his vote was taken when he went to go vote on election day. He was told that he could not vote because he had already voted. So it is real, it is happening. There were 4 women who were arrested recently in Tarrant County for ballot fraud. And one thing I want to make clear, because you know, it's a question when you talk about 2015 when and previous elections, is that these women, it is my belief that they were working on things prior to that. I've seen their names on things prior to 2016, which is where the charges are. But I will tell you that 2015, the reason why there's no charges on 2015, and there will never be, as far as the municipal election, is because those documents were shredded 6 months after the election, before we could even really look at them or really get into it. That was the statute at the time. It has now been changed, that now the documents have to be preserved until the statute of limitations runs out. So the elections that we're talking about previously, like lawns and everything like that, is that those are outside the statute of limitations. So we can't go back to those, unfortunately, but we can move forward. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that, and I'm happy to answer, you know, questions or whatever. Y'all can go to directactiontexas.com to see the work that we've done on Tarrant County and other counties as well, all over the state. But mail-in ballot fraud is real. It happens. Like he said, there has been a postal worker who was arrested, and I believe he was convicted because basically he would go, and when he would put a ballot in someone's mailbox, he'd raise his hand, and the ballot harvester would be right behind him and would take the ballot out of the mailbox because he was signaling when there were ballots. So we've had postal workers involved. We've seen people coming to doors with fruit baskets and offering fruit baskets and then getting people to vote. Down in the valley, they offer cocaine and other things to bribe people for their ballots and their votes. So, and a lot of times people have no idea that their vote was even taken. Someone will come up to them, they will be incredibly friendly, incredibly nice and helpful, and say, "Ma'am, why don't I go ahead and fill out your ballot for you? Who do you want to vote for?" And they'll tell them who they want to vote for, but they fill out that ballot however they wanted to fill it out, and then they hand it to the person to sign. So these are the kinds of things that are going on. So like he said, you know, we have to turn off the vote to do that. But another thing also I just want to throw out there, anyone who's willing to be on the ballot board, who's willing to be a poll watcher, who's willing to watch the ballot board is actually the last line of defense to check signatures and make sure they match and everything else. We have someone on the ballot board who's here right now. And so that's something that's really important too, that people want to volunteer.
I want to add 2 things to that.
One is the fruit basket story. You know, that's not necessarily illegal, but this is a scam that she's referring to in one of our local municipalities, and the person is involved with fruit or food basket deliveries on an ongoing basis, making that friendship with those not necessarily well-educated, low-income people and taking advantage of it. And here's the distinction I make. Let's be real clear. I'm a hardcore D. Where this is happening is in local elections. It really is not happening in the general election very much at all. And those higher turnout elections, that little bit of theft does not matter nearly as much as it does 23 votes in a city council election. And the other thing I want to add to your comments is it is not easy to get an indictment on these things, and it is even harder to get a conviction because there's so much money involved in this. These 4 women have some of the best overpaid attorneys available that we know have been successful in getting other people that have been indicted out of trouble. And so don't be...
for those attorneys?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Who's paying for those attorneys?
I wouldn't really know for sure because that's private information, but one does have one's suspicions.
Thank you very much, and we'll run another clip, crossing fingers that there's not a blue rainbow circle of death. Here we go.
I had an interview with a reporter for the Star Telegram, and I asked him why he doesn't find it somewhat suspicious that every single board meeting that he attends, there's unanimous approval without discussion of every single issue that the board brings up. And he said he didn't feel that it was his job to ask those kind of questions. Well, I believe it is his job. He's not supposed to simply report what's going on. He should be going behind the scenes, trying to understand. Well, if you're approving these things in this board meeting without discussion, did you ever discuss them? And if you did discuss them, were those discussions open to the public so the public could understand the ramifications of handing out these $1 million contracts to lobbyists and to contractors? Nobody knows really what's going on behind the scenes. Wouldn't a reporter want to know that?
And it's pretty hard to do anything when you're only newspaper in town. You're beating the drums for it. And Star Trek would kill it if they wanted to.
Reaching out to water board members is tough. It's a very close, tight clique that goes in. In the last election, I think it was 3.6% of the voters turned out to vote. So you had the people that were opponents of the project, supporters of the incumbents on the water board. They came out in large numbers.
Back with this.
All right, so I guess if we could have all of the speakers, Clyde and Mary, and Juan, come on up here, and we'll just take questions that you may have. I bet there's some out there. Oh, there you go. You'll have to share these two.
I want to give you an answer. I want to give you an answer to something that Mary brought up, and that is, I'm pretty sure the water district is set up the same way legally, but the manager of the water district, Jim Oliver, is working at the pleasure of the water district board, which is the city. In theory, this is the way it's supposed to work. By the way, legally it should work, as it does in the city, where the city manager works for the city council and can be hired by the council. When Mary was denied access to the building, denied stuff she wanted to see, a responsible water board would have ordered Jim Oliver to either produce or package bags and get the hell out. That's why the whole board was derelict, in my estimation, back at that time when Mary was trying to get on the board.
case you can't hear on this side of the room, what she's talking about is the nepotism has to be stopped. And in theory, it should be stopped outside the context of elections. I don't think it will be stopped unless we change the composition of the board.
Change the people, you gotta change the people.
Yeah.
The other question is, can the public attend the board meeting?
Oh, yes.
Can they have input?
You're allowed to make a 3-minute during public comments, but you have to get there before the meeting starts and sign up, and then you get 3 minutes, and they put this clock that's as huge as the board here, that, I mean, you get 3 minutes. But yes, you can, definitely can.
More and more,
Come on,
I think I've
baby.
read is what we're doing is have a really good article about your mom.
Yes.
So there's more and more information about it. It just seems like, is there some kind of group that actually works to stop this, or can it just go on?
That would be us.
Yes, you're part of it now.
Yeah, who currently, you said somebody audits it, but who currently audits it? That, is the auditor nepotistic, or what's
They
the?
audit themselves. Let me tell you a little bit about the auditing at the TRWD. Mickey Van Luckner's here in the audience today, and she ran in 2015, along with Craig Bickley. County Commissioner Judge Whitley, he campaigned in his official capacity for the incumbents. And the next, after the election and the incumbents got back on, there was an agenda item to change our contract with our internal auditing firm that we had used for, I think, 8 years.
Who is that from?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look. I can't remember the name of the firm at the time. Would be on the agenda item though. I can find that. And the recommendation was to change the firm to Whitley Penn. And so I thought, does anybody else in here think that that's a conflict of interest? And they said, Mary, why do you think like that? And I said, well, because he campaigned actively for the incumbents, and then we're going to give his company a fat contract after the fact. And so, of course, 4-1, at least I voted against it. But before I got on the board, there were close to 500 unanimous decisions. And if you think about it, my husband and I, we can't even agree on where to eat. So, you know, I mean, how realistically, 5 people agreeing to everything all the time? So it's and then hitting on what Clyde had to say, Jim Oliver, he runs that board. He runs that board, not the board. So in order for there to be change, we need to change that board again.
Mary, who do you think gets redder when they get mad, Jim Lane or Jim Oliver?
Ooh, that's pretty close.
You reminds me of the order from Shawshank Redemption.
Jennifer?
Okay, so only some people can vote in the TRWD election. Yet Arlington pays Fort Worth water rates, all the Halton City pays Fort Worth water rates, and other cities pay, and don't have a voice. How do we give everybody the right to vote in this election and get rid of these certificates?
That would take.
Mine segues off of that.
Okay.
And partly on what Lon spoke about, because if I recall correctly, last spring, the bond election was on a separate day than before. It was in April. It was a Saturday.
It was all of them.
It was a separate day.
No, it was all on the same ballot.
It was on the same ballot.
It was on the opposite side. There was Fort Worth propositions on one side, and then on the other side was just the Tarrant Regional Water District.
Well, there was another election in April. What was that?
That was good.
It had to
That's a
do with
runoff.
Panther Island development.
I think it may have been a primary runoff.
Yes.
Because in even number of years, you can have your primaries in March, and then there's a runoff in April. And so that may be what you're thinking about.
Let me add something here.
vote in this election that patriots.
Somebody better than I may know how the district lines were established in the first
Let me
place.
address that a little bit. I don't live in the water district myself. I've lived in Fort Worth now for 45 years. We moved in 2000, I think it was, to a house that's still in Fort Worth, but the property was annexed after 2006, I believe it was, or 1996, I'm sorry, 1996. And the water district had a law passed back in 1996, I guess is when they had that law passed, that gave only those people who lived within the city limits prior to 1996 the right to vote in the water district. So a lot of people live in Fort Worth, don't actually live within the water district. And a lot of people, just about everybody, however, in this metropolitan area, not in Dallas, but in Fort Worth, and surrounding small communities, get their water, a lot of them get their water secondhand from Fort Worth. So what happens in Fort Worth matters in those smaller towns that buy the water, because if Fort Worth has to pay more for water, so are the communities that they sell water to. And if the bonds go belly up, or Treasury River Vision fails and somehow the city has to pay for bonds, or if the water district has to put the bill for the bonds, then they're going to raise the tax rate, charge more for water. Everybody winds up suffering from the whole thing.
Clyde's comment about how that was established, it was probably in 95, possibly in 97. I get some blame for it if it's in 97. But here's the thing, pointing to the fact that it's a district, the legislature controls a lot of this. I filed legislation my first 2 or 3 terms in the legislature to make it single-member districts, because it's the only elected body in Fort Worth, serving Central City Fort Worth, where there aren't single-member districts. And when I first went into office, there had never been a person of color on the board. Now they are hand-picking their person of color on the board, but which is a minor improvement, but they're hand-picking it, just like before they had single-member districts for the city council. 7th Street would hand-pick what person of color would serve on the city council, what person of color would serve on the school board. What the point of this is, the water district is a creation of the state, but individuals that are more influential than others are the ones to determine the outcome. I have no idea the history behind this, but I think it happened in 95, because I think I would have noticed that it happened in 97.
Somewhere back in there, also the water district power to take property for economic development by eminent domain, that was a law passed more recently by Charlie Garrett.
Yeah. So we have to do this with the legislative.
And let me explain, it was done years and years ago. Right in the beginning of the design, the implementation of the water district. It was a mandatory contract. Local areas, cities, municipalities were allowed to vote on whether or not they wanted to be part of the water district. Some people opted out. So that's still current today. That's what we're going off of, is that a mandatory contract.
Okay, I have a question about candidates, because we want to change the board, and get rid of Tim Oliver, et cetera, et cetera. I know you're running. Does anybody know who else is running?
Yeah, the gentleman in here, Gary Modes, he's going to be running for the water district. There's another man that has filed, name is CB Teen, the realtor of Fort Worth, and of course Jim.
More news stations are picking it up. The mayor is not happy, so there's a rift there. Well, the mayor should have asked questions a long time ago. So now that she is, we're thankful somebody is, and somebody's reporting it.
Sorry, the mayor is endorsing the incumbents.
Yes, that's
That should tell you right there.
she has a race to run as well.
It is a 7th Street game.
She endorses the audit. Does she endorse a thorough, you'll find out something from an audit?
We would have to ask Ms. Price that question. I heard Freeze and Nickel was sitting
You may have seen some of the Channel 5 news broadcasts, and one that was back here a month or so ago, they happened to be on it, and they were asking about whether the railroad, the train trolley system into the Trinity Vision area of the central city would be feasible and part of the project. Well, it was never in the plan to have it was never funded, I should say. There was never any funding for the train to go into the central city project. There was never any funding for a wakeboard park. There was never funding for a skating rink, or a drive-in movie theater, or a restaurant on the river. All those, I think, probably were coming out of Trinity River Vision funding. Is my guess. I can't say for sure. But that's one of those things that we would hope an audit would turn up, is whether things have been funded that they were not even in the plan, that they should not have funded, and who benefited from. Because the wakeboard park, I think, was defunct a year or two after it was dug. And
let's develop this and let's develop that.
Jackie, I want to go back. Oh, sorry.
The plan that was adopted by the city council by the ordinance in 2009 is way more about economic development and only a teeny tiny little about flooding.
It was from the get-go.
So if they're gonna comply with what they did in 2009, which is rhetoric but not have substance, we're screwed.
We don't need a speech, we need a question.
Something that's just flood control, that would be better.
well, as I mentioned earlier, the reason for the flood control is because of the straightening of the channel. And that's what floods Mary's property even more, and also Arlington and downstream to Dallas. And the Corps had to provide some flood relief for the straightening out of the channel. And that's where all the flood money goes.
Jackie, your original question goes to the whole issue of, is this a whitewash or not? And none of us, I think, are in a position to know. We can all have our suspicions, and everybody in this room can have a role by going to these board meetings. They have historically not been monitored. I was shocked to find out on the day that they were voting to do the study, they wouldn't even let the public speak at the special call meeting. But that's kind of standard operating procedure. It is such a closed shop with not even letting the duly elected board member have access to information. So I would ask all of you to spend as much time at the next board meeting as you're spending here on this Saturday afternoon getting educated about the issue, because they always are uncomfortable when people are there watching.
Now, why don't you speak after they vote?
You can speak to the media before they vote. You can talk to the media when you see them coming in. There's some other questions over there.
Yeah, have there been any consequences as a result of the recent NBC5 stories? Has the board done anything at least substantially, or at least pretended to?
Well, they got the audit, but who they're having the audit is in question.
Yeah, they're moving forward with that at least. I mean, I'm kind of surprised they're even doing that.
No, Freeze and Nichols has not been chosen, which is one of the reasons it's worth calling the board members and saying you are appalled at the idea that a company that has such a clear conflict of interest would be even considered for the audit. That's the way you let those board members know. Now, how you get their phone numbers, I don't know. Jim Lane's listed, he's an attorney in the phone book. I've got Marty's phone number. You can actually, because of Sunshine Mary, I like that. Because of Sunshine Mary's efforts, you can actually find information on these elected officials. So contact them, and you may feel like you're kind of pissing in the wind, but piss, because they're pissing on you.
So how would you describe the conflict when you called it? How would you describe the conflict that you object to when you called it?
Well,
they've had any number of contracts with the water district over the years. I can't tell you what all contracts.
I can't tell you what all contracts Rees and Nichols have had, but it's as big as the oldest engineering firm. I mean, it's almost 100 years old, based in Fort Worth forever. They've built more dams and have been involved in more water projects than probably any other engineering firm in the state. They are eminently not qualified to be the the chicken coop. You gotta have a legitimate audit firm looking at the money. And I personally think, my father was in planning and scheduling at Lockheed for decades. I personally think the major problem is the mindset that a lot of people have. They just haven't managed this project. In addition to anything that you may be offended by, there's just been incredibly bad management of this project.
I'd like to tell you, when I was on the board, I would ask routinely, I mean, we're looking at millions of dollar contracts. So I started researching the contracts, and I would ask, for example, James Smith got up to do a presentation from the Water District on a $17 million contract for a pipeline. I'm just throwing it out there. And I noticed when I looked at the company getting the contract had the same last name as James Smith. So I would say, Miss Smith, are you happen to be related to John Smith of this firm? And I mean, her face went white, and she said, "That's my husband." And you know, and I asked, doesn't anybody think that's a conflict of interest? No. I mean, all along my 4 years, it was just one of my comments when I first got on was, is Rees and Nichols the only contracting firm in Fort Worth? Because that's who got all of the contracts, and I didn't know any better. I've learned a lot since. But the conflict of interest, our financial officer, Sandy Newby, is married to Brian Newby, and not only does he do lobbying for the TRWD, but we also buy bonds from his company. That's, to me, yes, and he used to be a board member. So there's just so much going on there when you get in there, and actually their secret weapon is that they've remained secret and for all these years. And now people like this group here have been chipping away at it. Now we finally have Channel 5 that's looking into it, and the more people like get anything done.
About your Rees and Nichols question, that was an employee who threatened you and your mother in a grocery store, correct? They told her not to mess with Rees and Nichols shortly after she had been elected.
Can I plug in? I'm trying to help JD Granger get a new job. So I'm going to sir, if you want to grab one.